Council on their report.
The briefing materials for that workshop. We'll make sure you get a copy of those, and they're also posted on our website, but wanted to make sure you had it in your hands. We left off in our letter on page 6 with the issue of discard mortality rates, and this is an issue we've been working on over the past year or two in terms of improving our discard mortality rate estimates that are applied to halibut discards in the groundfish fisheries. Essentially, the method that was developed through our staff and our plan team, groundfish plan teams, and IPHC staff are involved in that process as well, resulted in a method that follows more the statistical design of the observer program, and they're applied rather than in the past by specific target species. They developed them along the lines of operational groupings, where it's catcher processors have different operational characteristics than catcher vessels, and the pelagic trawl, for example, different operational characteristics than non-pelagic trawl. And you can see the resulting DMRs that were adopted by the Council this past month that will be applied for the 2017 and 2018 groundfish fisheries. And I won't go through all those, Mr. Chairman. They're there for your reference. I don't think they differ dramatically from previous DMR estimates, but there are some changes, and I think that the bottom line is it made more sense to do them by operational groupings than by simple target species. And we did also note through our electronic monitoring work group and your staff, Mr. Claude Dykstra, that the IPHC was pursuing research proposals to revisit some of the older IPHC studies on the DMRs within the directed halibut fisheries, and we simply noted that and support that continued research. I'll pause, and if there are no questions at this point, I'll move on to the next item. And that next item, in fact, has to do with electronic monitoring. In December, the Council formally adopted electronic monitoring as a part of the North Pacific Observer Program. We've been operating through pilot programs over the past couple of years, and now that EM option will be integrated into the annual Observer Program deployment plan process, and through that process, the Council and the agency, NIMS, will be able to consider how to optimize Observer and or EM deployment. Based on analysis of cost, budget, fishing effort, and monitoring. The Council also included an option to have well vessels opting into the EM selection pool to use EM for compliance monitoring with the IIQ or halibut CDQ in multiple areas. And it is our understanding that such an allowance requires complementary action, regulatory action by you, this body. And we know that law enforcement has a regulatory amendment proposal for your consideration, which would resolve this issue if you adopt it. So hopefully you'll be addressing that at this meeting.
Yeah, go ahead, Jim.
I was just going to say I don't remember seeing that, and I wondered if I missed it. We have a proposal about fishing multiple areas, but it's just resolving. Muted. And I didn't see mention in that of EM, and I wondered about that.
This might be a better question better answered by Rachel when she gives her agency report, but it was my understanding that the net result would solve our problem as well, and so I better defer that question to people that actually know the answer. The next item we had was halibut deck starting, and you already
Does the timeframe for implementation in this program?
Well, I think there may be the allowing fishing in multiple areas would be implemented 2018. If you're talking about the electronic monitoring program itself, I think that's also 2018, but this year is a pre-implementation year. Linda's got a better handle on it.
If I could answer, there's 90 boats in the fixed gear sablefish halibut fishery carrying EM this year. So we've been in from pilot program to pre-implementation and moving towards by implementation, meaning it'll be under a regulatory process and included in. But the data is being collected from the boats, has been for a number of years, and integrated this year with 90 boats participating.
And so that's why you would need the regulatory change this year too?
The regulatory process has been moving along to, as the testing is done to figure out the best way to handle the data, store the data, transfer data, the regs are coming along to.
They're catching up.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Next item I wanted to talk about was the Area 4 Halibut IFQ leasing regulatory amendment package that's being considered by the Council. In essence, this would allow CDQ groups to lease halibut IFQ in areas 4B, 4C, and D in years of low halibut catch limits. In effect, this would allow CDQ groups to lease halibut IFQ for use by residents on vessels less than or equal to 51 feet, and again, subject to IFQ use regulations and the group's own internal management. In essence, this is to allow additional fishing opportunities for those areas. For example, the St. Paul area, 4C, D, and E areas, when we have, as we've had in the past couple of years, low catch limits for those areas. And the Council will not take a final action on this. They're going to review a revised analysis at their upcoming meeting, and the preliminary preferred alternative that's being considered with a threshold of 1 million pounds for Area 4B and 1.5 million pounds for Area 4CDE, under which, when that happened, that flexibility for leasing would occur and would be available to the groups, and that's the essence of that. And we expect this issue is going to be up for initial review by the Council again at its meeting next week in Seattle, and likely would be up for final action in April, and therefore likely a 2018 implementation. The next item I have on my list, we're getting close to the end here, is the Gulf of Alaska Trawl Bycatch Management Initiative that our Council's been working on for at least the last couple of years. And in December, the Council basically voted to postpone any further action on this agenda item, and therefore it's going to be on hold unless and until it's brought back to the Council at a future meeting. And in essence, the Council reached a bit of a roadblock, if you will. There was the alternatives on the table included a full allocation of all target species and a sort of an IFQ style program, and the other, there was I think a basic philosophical problem with that approach for many of the Council members. And on the other hand, the alternative of a PSC only allocation for a number of reasons was found to be ineffective and unworkable. And so for the moment, that initiative, at least for the moment, is on hold. The Council did take a couple of actions attendant to that, to initiate discussion papers on some potential PSC reductions measures specifically for the Western Gulf, and that was looking at the temporal distribution of halibut during the cod A season and the timing of pollock harvest in the C and D seasons relative to Chinook salmon. So there are some follow-on actions that are related to bycatch that the Council is considering. The next item, in December, when the Council was having a general discussion of ways to minimize overall halibut bycatch mortality, the Council discussed and voted to recommend to the Commission that they further evaluate the biological and yield impacts of the current 32-inch minimum size limit in the directed fisheries and consider the potential savings of a lower minimum size limit And I know this is something the Commission has looked at previously and didn't make any changes to that. The Council is simply encouraging you to look at that as an option for reducing overall bycatch mortality. One item that's not in the letter, but I just wanted to bring up, and I think Ms. Binkin brought this up earlier in the week, is that this issue of the mixing of guided and unguided halibut in the charter fisheries, and through our enforcement committee, that issue is being discussed, and a further discussion paper is going to be brought to the Council at its upcoming meeting. And so there is potential action that could flow from that to try to address that problem. The last item I mentioned here, the halibut management framework, and the most recent updated iteration of that document is dated September of 2016. There are some additional bits of information that the Council has discussed and requested be included in that document. One of those is the model of the halibut stock assessment workflow with explanations of how information on migration, natural mortality, size and weighted age, and DMRs are parameterized or influence that assessment. And secondly is a more detailed information regarding the IPHC's SPR work and how that's going to affect the overall assessment approach. Those two items are two items that do require some assistance and input from your staff, and we have refrained from bugging them over the past few months because of the obvious workload associated with your annual meeting process, and that's something we'll circle back to after the dust settles a little bit. So those were all the items I had, Mr. Chairman, and I'll look to Dan to see if he has anything he wants to add.
Thank you, Chris and Commissioners. I do want to add a couple of comments or observations for you on the Gulf of Alaska trawl bycatch management and anticipating some interest. The motion to postpone was passed by, I think it was like an 8-3 vote, and the effect, as Chris indicated, is to maintain the status quo management of the trawl fleet, meaning that they will use voluntary co-ops when possible to manage their bycatch limits of Chinook and halibut and achieve the allowable groundfish harvests. And in the absence of those voluntary co-ops, they'll operate more as Olympic-style fisheries where each vessel is going to compete for the available TAC subject to whatever factors or constraints there may be regarding weather, or markets, or delivery times they've got arranged with processors. And I think that I'm not going to try to speak, obviously, for individual council members and their voting on this, but I think it's safe to say that those in support of it did so for a variety of reasons, including some relating to the philosophical opposition to catch shares and experience with the effect of other catch share programs in Alaska, the lack of progress on discussions among some of the interested parties and development of action alternatives since our June council meeting, and whether a crisis exists in the trawl fleet that has to be fixed at this time. I also want to make clear to the commissioners that I don't believe that council members are no longer interested in bycatch management of halibut in the Gulf of Alaska, and I'm certain that there's still interest in better understanding the impacts of that bycatch on the stock and other users, and our action to include the Gulf of Alaska in developing an abundance-based approach to halibut PSC limits, I think is further evidence of this. I guess in this case, for this analytical package, bycatch was just not the driving factor in the decision making. And we did receive considerable public comment in support of bycatch reduction and increases in observer coverage generally, but those comment letters also opposed the catch share approach to address them. And we didn't receive comment letters from the directed halibut users indicating that they supported that catch share approach to managing PSC limits. So I wanted to provide a little bit further information for the commissioners on that.
All right, thanks very much, Dan, and let's see if there's questions. Bob?
So, Chris, with regards to at least one point on the size limit you raised issue, I believe at our interim meeting we asked our staff to update that discussion paper and have it come back to us in the fall. And so we'll be looking at that time. And then I had a question on the observer program in the Gulf. In the last publication on your observer program, there was two comments in there. One indicated that the species diversity of landed versus unobserved versus observed is significantly different, and as well as you might be you're observing based on trips, and for instance last year I think it was 24% in the trawl fleet, but that might have reflected only 12% of total landings. Is the council looking at some method to embellish their current numbers, which have been slipped to 17 and I think it's 11% for fixed gear and or long line gear and hook and line gear and 17 for the trawl fleet?
Well, I think as part of the annual deployment plan process, and particularly now we have the EM formally as an option in that process, at least for some of the smaller fixed gear vessels. I don't know that it's going to necessarily affect directly the coverage in the trawl fleet that I think you're referring to, but that's just a balancing act the council has to deal with every year based on available funds. And we at various times have asked for supplemental funding from the agency to help augment that. I think all I can say, Mr. Alverson, is I assume that's something the council is going to continue to look at very closely and try to optimize that coverage as best they can. At some point, I suppose they could consider adjusting the fee percentage as well to perhaps provide additional coverage levels.
And if I'd like to add, Mr. Alverson, in June we will get our annual report from last year's observer coverage, and I think for the rates were higher. I believe for the trawl fleet it was around 24%, maybe 18% for the fixed gear fleet. I think at our June meeting we'll get a first look at estimates of variance or variance around the estimates of bycatch that we have not had in the past, and so that will give us a better understanding of the, I'm hopeful, of the coverage rates that will provide the best data, and that's certainly a big part of the decision making for us in terms of the fees that are charged and so on, in order, as Chris said, to balance the coverage for all users within a fixed amount that's collected from the fee.
Any other questions? I had one or two, and Bob already asked one that I was thinking about as well. I guess I certainly have a real low baseline knowledge of a number of the fisheries in Alaska, and I understand some of the challenges that you're certainly going through with trying to figure out ways to manage and reduce bycatch, and but I guess my observation from hearing yesterday and this morning is that it seems things are going quite slowly and making progress around further reductions or management processes to, I would say, reduce bycatch of halibut and potentially, I suppose, other species, but halibut for this body. And so I guess maybe just a comment. I guess I find that a little disappointing, and I recognize that you have many fisheries there to manage, and that that's not an easy thing. What I was wondering, though, is you have work on abundance-based halibut bycatch. And what I'm also wondering about, have you undertaken or thought about establishing criteria around defining minimization of bycatch to make this thing practical? because as far as I know, that's the policy that's in place, and I've wondered what you've thought about how that may be implemented. I recognize that abundance-based is one kind of tool, but when you get down to it, what does that mean as far as practical? It's even a hard word to say. You know, as we've probably seen a couple of times, Dana, you know, there's other fisheries that have made some efforts in that regard and made substantive changes to their fisheries as a result of bycatches of other species have been reduced quite greatly. I wonder if you have thoughts about looking at criteria around, you know, what can we do as far as minimizing.
Well, I'll give it a try. I haven't thought about it in particular, so I might think of other answers for you after I leave the table here. But the trawl fleet in the Gulf, I'm thinking of in particular, has undertaken their own efforts, and I think if there were representatives here, they would be able to relay those to you in terms of the use of excluders and the communications that they have on the ground. They've developed some of those methods through the rockfish program, which is a catch-share program in the trawl fleet. I think that has helped them in the other non-catch-share groundfish fisheries in the Gulf. So to the extent that we've, I suppose, devolved the management or how best to practicably minimize bycatch to the trawl fleet, they've undertaken efforts on their own, and I'm just not able to provide you with that you're looking for. The council does not, off the top of my head, try to define what's most practical to this point.
Just briefly after that, and I think you're going to hear from some of the representatives of particularly the Amendment 80 sector. In addition to council's own actions over the past couple of years, resulted in some fairly significant reductions in our PSC cap. Those members of the fishing industry have done a very admirable job of not only staying within that cap, but implementing measures to stay below that cap, and they've done a pretty good job of themselves. As Dan mentioned, we haven't formally defined what the word practicable means in a quantitative sense. All I can say is it's that striving to try to continue that, allowing a very valuable commercial groundfish fishing to be prosecuted while trying to maintain to the extent we can, you know, minimize halibut within at the same time. So there's not a quantitative number associated with that. When you look at some of the we brought up yesterday under the ABM approach, there is the opportunity there to, in terms of these the so-called performance metrics, to actually define, maybe not defining the word practicable, but defining what the council as a policy choice believes are the correct numbers for maintaining a projected minimum halibut fishery, for example, or some directed groundfish harvest. But practical comes down to trying to achieve that balance.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. So this probably isn't a fair question, but you know, the Halibut Commission spent quite a bit of time on the bycatch report 3 or 4 years ago, which showed the bycatch rates, for example, in the Bering Sea and how they compared to other fisheries, as Mr. Ryle refers to. Have we looked at those now that the council has further reduced bycatch, how that the bycatch rate in the Bering Sea compares to other fisheries along the coast? We haven't updated it here, but it occurs to me that it may not be dissimilar to other fisheries.
Commissioner Balsker, we haven't updated any of our information or any report report other than what we get at our December meeting, which at the annual management report shows those rates and how they've declined over time.
Bob?
Yeah, Chris and Dan, just as an observation, in terms of the reduction of by 25% in the Amendment 80 fleet and their this year's 2016 success on what they've achieved, which the last numbers I saw were suggested maybe a 37 to 38% reduction in their column, and so they really overachieved and did a great job, and I think pushes the bar on, to me, what the term "to the degree practical" is, and what was envisioned even by the council 18 months ago when they voted, because I know there was, I don't think anybody thought that they could achieve that in as short a time frame as they did. And so I just put that out there as my observation of at least up to through this year. So.
Yes, Linda.
Maybe just a comment on that rather than a question. But so I fully agree that there's more to do to reduce bycatch, and this is a conversation that's ongoing, and there's a lot of work being done by the industry to try to push the bar lower on bycatch. But I would note that the bycatch, as Ian showed, is the lowest in Alaska that it's been now since the 60s. So quite a bit has been done, and some pretty significant progress has been made, mostly in the Bering Sea. I think a lot of the disappointment with where things were headed with the Gulf Rationalization Program was that it did start with a real focus on bycatch, and where it sort of fell apart was there was a lot of people who felt those bycatch reductions weren't being effectively achieved through the program that was potentially moving ahead. So it's an opportunity to regroup, refocus, and try and achieve what you're talking about, sort of what's practical, what can actually be done to reduce bycatch. And I think in addition to some of the efforts that were presented to us, or that Mr. Hull talked about, in the Gulf of Alaska there have been voluntary co-ops organized to where the vessels are sharing information, trying to control catch rates so they can control bycatch. We also just in the last few days had a fleet voluntarily stand down in the Pacific cod target fishery, hook and line fishery, because bycatch rates were higher than they felt were acceptable. So there's attention to the issue. It's not where any of us probably would like to be in the halibut fishery, but there has been some progress made, and we're still fully committed to making more progress.
Yeah, thanks very much, Linda. And that's good to hear about some more of the context of the issues that are being dealt with in Alaska, for sure. I think we all kind of face that in various fisheries. I know for one that we're managing in BC right now as well in a shrimp fishery that's a trawl fishery, and they impact upon Ulican, and Ulican is potentially going to be listed under our Species at Risk Act. It's at least under consideration. We probably went from 12 tons as a limit of Ulican bycatch down to currently it's 2. If it's listed, it'll be even less. And so that fleet had to find a whole bunch of ways to get down from 12 to 2. And that's why I was wondering about defining things like what are possible. And not saying they're all the same in every fishery. And I can understand the issues that were being explained by Chris and Dan about some of the other challenges faced, just not around bycatch, but the management of the fishery overall. But I guess, I mean, it was just my observation that things were going a bit slower than we all were anticipated, and I do recognize the efforts that have been made, as you said. Yeah. If there are no more questions, thanks very much, Chris and Ben. So I'm not sure the exact order that we're proceeding, but I think up next is NIP. Yeah. I would, just an observation, Adam and Michelle are here, and they can provide a short summary of what's going on with membership in the MSAB. We could do that after the NIMS presentation. Okay.
We ready? Good morning. I'm Julie Scheuer, the Recreational Fishing Coordinator for the Alaska region of National Marine Fisheries Service. And I'll be presenting on a couple of charter fishing topics, and then I'll hand it over to Rachel Baker to present on some topics related to the commercial halibut fishery in Alaska. In 2014, the Area 2C and 3A halibut capturing plan replaced the guideline harvest level as the method for determining allowable levels of charter halibut harvest in those areas. The capturing plan also endorses a process through which the North Pacific Fishery Management Council recommends annual management measures to the IPHC that are likely to limit charter harvests to their annual catch limits. And the IPHC sets a combined catch limit for the commercial and charter fisheries in these areas. In 2016, what's on the screen here, the combined catch limit for Area 2C was set at 4,950,000 pounds, and that triggered an 18.3% allocation to the charter fishery under the capturing plan for a charter catch limit of 906,000 pounds. Management measures in 2016 to keep charter harvest to the catch limit included a one fish daily bag limit with a reverse slot limit of under 43 inches or over 80 inches. Under those restrictions, charter harvest is estimated at 844,000 pounds, about 7% below the catch limit. In Area 3A for 2016, the combined catch limit was 9.6 million pounds, which triggered an 18.9% allocation to the charter fishery for a charter catch limit of 1.814 million pounds. Management measures in Area 3A included a two fish daily bag limit with a maximum size limit of 28 inches on one of those fish, a Wednesday closure for charter fishing for the entire season, a 4 fish annual limit, as well as limits of 1 trip per vessel per day and 1 trip per charter halibut permit per day. Under those restrictions, charter harvest is estimated at 1.981 million pounds, about 9% over the catch limit. And in December 2016, the Council recommended charter management measures for 2017, which Mr. Oliver discussed in his report from the Council. This table is in the NIPS report to the IPHC and summarizes transfers under the Guided Angler Fish Program for the 3 years that it's been in place. The Guided Angler Fish Program was implemented as part of the catch sharing plan for Areas 2C and 3A and authorizes limited annual transfers of commercial halibut IFQ to qualified charter halibut permit holders for harvest by charter vessel anglers in Area 2C and 3A. Charter halibut permit holders may use GAF to offer charter vessel anglers the opportunity to retain halibut of any size up to the limit for unguided anglers when the annual management measures in place limit charter vessel anglers to more restrictive size or harvest limits as they do now. Because the unguided limit is 2 fish of any size per day, using GAF, charter vessel anglers in Areas 2C and 3A can harvest up to 2 halibut of any size per day, and GAF are not subject to the annual limit or the daily closures in Area 3A. So a charter angler could fish on Wednesdays, for example, if they used exclusively GAF. NIMS issues GAF in numbers of halibut based on a conversion factor from IFQ pounds based on the average size of GAF harvested in the previous year. That conversion factor has increased every year and is currently 74 pounds of IFQ per gaff in Area 2C and 42 pounds of IFQ per gaff in Area 3A. For 2016, NMFS processed 158 transfers of IFQ, totaling more than 57,000 pounds of IFQ to 43 different charter halibut permit holders. These transfers authorize the potential harvest of up to 1,012 additional halibut as gaff by charter vessel anglers. The numbers of transfers, pounds of IFQ transferred, number of charter halibut permit holders obtaining gaff permits, and the number of fish that gaff permit holders were allowed to harvest all increased in 2016 compared to 2015. Of the potential 1,012 gaff fish available for harvest, charter vessel anglers harvested 749, and the unused gaff were returned to the IFQ holder before the end of the season. And that's all I have on that. If there's any questions about either of those items.
Any questions? So, and that table you were just looking at, where it says 73%, that's what was used, and then the remainder was transferred back, or am I getting?
That's correct. There's the option for either a voluntary return of unused gaff at the end of the summer, and so then the IFQ holder can harvest those pounds, or about 2 weeks before the end of the season, it automatically, any unused pounds automatically go back into the IFQ holder's account.
So you have some sort of database quota management system for keeping track of all this, I guess?
Yes.
So does it then require someone to approve all these transfers within the agency?
Yes, an application must be submitted by both parties, the IFQ holder and the charter halibut permit holder, and our restricted access management program approves those transfers. And then there's an electronic reporting requirement for at the end of each day or trip that gaff are harvested, they must report the size of the fish so that that gaff fish can be deducted from their account.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Rachel Baker from the National Marine Fisheries Service Alaska region, and I was going to highlight a few issues in the remainder of the report that you received for this agenda item. And it looks like very similar to the report that we've provided you for the past several years, so I will just call your attention to a few things. I'll be starting with section 2 on page 2, getting into the commercial groundfish fisheries and the halibut bycatch in those fisheries. And so just as a bit of a reminder for some of you, halibut bycatch mortality in the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands and Gulf of Alaska groundfish fisheries is regulated and managed by the Council and NMFS through the fishery management plans that we have for those groundfish fisheries. And through regulations implementing the fishery management plans, NMFS manages halibut bycatch by establishing what we call annual prohibited species catch limits. And then the groundfish fisheries are managed to ensure that halibut PSC does not exceed those established limits. And just a little bit of background on what prohibited species catch means. It means that PSC species must be avoided while fishing for groundfish, and PSC species may not be retained unless required under a few very small exceptions under the FMP. So again, halibut PSC limits are basically an apportioned upper limit on the bycatch of halibut in the fishery. And if the PSC limit is reached in a fishery, the fishery is closed to further groundfish fishing, even if the groundfish total allowable catch has not been harvested. And although halibut is taken as bycatch essentially using all types of fishing gear, halibut bycatch in Alaska occurs primarily in the trawl and hook and line groundfish fisheries, and therefore the Council and NMFS have established PSC limits for vessels in the trawl and hook and line groundfish fisheries in both the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands and the Gulf of Alaska. And we presented a couple of tables in the report, tables 2 and 3 on page 3 of your report, to provide both the halibut PSC limits and the estimated halibut PSC use for 2016 in both areas. And so, for example, in table 2, the limit for halibut PSC in the Bering Sea is 3,515 metric tons. Use in 2016 was below that limit, just over 2,300 metric tons. And just to provide context, that's about 3.8 million pounds of halibut PSC used to harvest just under 2 million metric tons of groundfish. And in the Gulf, the numbers are there too for the total, 1,963 metric tons for the halibut PSC limit. Use was a little more than 1,500 metric tons, which is about 2.6 million pounds of halibut to harvest just under 600,000 tons of groundfish. The next couple pages of the report present some figures that we've shown you in the past, just to give you basically time series of halibut prohibited species use and the limits, and so we present both areas together, and then we present a couple of figures separately. Long-term trend generally showing PSC use going down, and PSC use has not exceeded any of the established limits in recent years. So moving on a little bit, dialing down into the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands, just a reminder that the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands halibut PSC limit is apportioned among 4 sectors. The Amendment 80 sector, which are non-pollock trawl catcher processors, the BSAI trawl limited access sector, the non-trawl sector, and the CDQ program, or the Community Development Quota Program, which is also called the CDQ sector. And as we reported to you last year in 2016, the Council and NMFS reduced halibut PSC limits in the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands groundfish fisheries by 21% overall from their 2015 levels. And if you look on Table 4 on page 7 of our report, we provide the halibut PSC limit reductions in metric tons and in millions of pounds to show that there were different PSC limit reductions for each sector. And then I also wanted to note, for the past couple of years, we have provided you additional information about halibut PSC use in the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands, and we've again provided that information in the appendix to this report. Essentially, we break out halibut PSC use by IPHC area. We also provide a little bit more information. We compare, trawl PSC in the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands for 2015 and 2016, and then the last part of the appendix is just providing a little more detailed information on PSC use by fishery for 2015 and 2016 in the trawl fisheries. So I'd be happy to answer any questions about the appendix that you would have. So, yep.
So, Rachel, could you go back up to your table 2? I can't remember what page that was on.
It is, Mr. Chair, that's on page 3 of the report. I think one more, yeah.
So on that first box up there, there is a designation for the trawl fleet, and I think it's called limited entry trawl quota, or it's not Amendment 80. And do they have a different assigned PSC limit? Is there another element that box isn't including, or is the total down there inclusive of all the trawl PSC?
Mr. Chair, thank you, Commissioner Alverson. Yes, in Table 2, the box on the left, the first box in the first column that says trawl, includes both Amendment 80 and the trawl limited access fishery. And I will just add, so that's the limit and the use, includes both of those sectors. If you look at Table 4, in the report on page 7, we break out the PSC limits. There is the separate limit for the trawl limited access fishery. And in terms of use, this is helpful for putting the report together in future years. We will put all this together. Yes, sorry, table 2 in the appendix, which is on page 3 of the appendix on my copy. We provide PSC use for 2015 and 2016 by those same sectors, both Amendment 80 and trawl limited access.
Any other questions? Linda?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Rachel, there was a question earlier about bycatch rates in Bering Sea and the Gulf and how they might compare to bycatch rates in other countries. Is that information that you have or could provide?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Benkin, we could, yes, I think we could provide that information. We haven't, like the council, we have not looked at that information recently. I think we looked at a little bit of that information when the council was addressing its halibut PSC reduction action in the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands to try and provide some information on rates, but so we do have the information available to do that. Thank you.
I'm not seeing any more questions, so thanks very much for your report.
Okay.
So I'm just going to change the agenda a little bit, and we'll hear from Adam and Michelle about the MSAB membership process. Yeah, Bob?
So kind of going off of this last report from Rachel, I think the Amendment 80 fleet indicated that their rate encounter in halibut had dropped, and I think it was 0.15 to 0.09 or something like that. I can't remember what the metrics was, but it was a significant drop this year. And that makes sense for a group trying to avoid something, but I'm just wondering, is there some data that shows from the National Marine Fisheries Service trawl survey what what the rate per metric ton in yellowfin sole and rock sole and some of these might be, so that my concern is that maybe we're having a drop in juvenile fish in general, and is there a way to get a fix on that? It'd be interesting in our next meeting if we had some information on that.
Is that a question you wanted to ask Rachel? Or?
Well, I don't know if Rachel would be able to develop that, or if our own staff would be able to get that info. Of course, they may have to go to NIMS to get it, so I guess.
Looks like Glenn might have an answer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, Glenn Merrill with National Marine Fisheries Service. We can provide, and I think it's already provided in our annual SAFE report, information about distribution of the stocks at various survey points. I think comparison between survey data of size at age and the commercial size of age is problematic for a couple of reasons, and that's because of the nature of the commercial fisheries being very different, where they fish, how they fish, timing of the fishing relative to that. We do have information from our observer program about size at age from the sampled portions of the catches that they receive. I think that's used as a proxy as well that feeds into our stock assessment. I think some of this is available already through the SAFE process, but I note some caution in our ability to be able to make comparisons between survey size at age, commercial size at age. I'll also note that the nature of the Amendment 80 fisheries, they typically blend their fisheries, so you don't always have a clean indication of this being a yellowfin sole target, this being a rock sole target, simply because they can do that under their quota allocation programs. Mr. Chairman, if I may, they wouldn't, not necessarily yellowfin sole and acca mackerel, given those fisheries and where they occur, but certainly you have acca mackerel and Pacific Ocean perch that can co-occur together. There's a small portion of the fleet that also does participate in yellowfin sole fisheries. They might participate also to some extent in the Bering Sea and limited fisheries for, say, Pacific Ocean perch as well. I think we'd have to look at the data to see what those splits might be, but it would necessarily be a messy data source, I think, in comparing those.
Yeah, go ahead, Bob.
So one of the discussion points on abundance base at the North Pacific Council has been using the National Fisheries Service trawl survey as one index. And so that's why I'm going back to that. I'm wondering that trawl survey must be able to produce a rate on some of the some of its target fisheries in the Central Bering Sea. And I'm just wondering if that would give us any insight over the last 10 years what the rate of halibut per ton, is it dropping, is it going up or down? I assume that that survey is being talked about because there's some measurable element that of rate of halibut density. So there must be something somewhere that gives us a picture of what the rate's been doing the last 10 years.
So, Mr. Chairman, I think I'll defer specifics on the ABM to the discussion that will happen later on that. I believe the survey is helpful as providing an index of juvenile halibut abundance, and as with any survey, it's providing this on a regularized, standardized methodology so that we can compare between years. In terms of rates in the commercial fishery and how they have changed over time, those are driven by factors that are greater than simply the abundance of halibut in the ocean. In other words, all of the regulatory changes that we've made over the last 10 or 12 years can have a substantial impact on the rates. The Amendment 80 program going into effect substantially changed the behavior of the fishery and substantially changed the rates of the fishery. So it doesn't necessarily provide a good indication of abundance as you would receive from the survey. We can provide that information on how commercial rates have changed over time, the performance of the fleet, but I'd be cautious about using that as a proxy for overall halibut abundance.
I was more interested in using maybe the proxy of the National Fisheries Trawl Survey that is more what is set up as a scientific experiment rather than the industry numbers. Yeah.
Linda?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I am reminded that the trawl survey numbers are incorporated into our stock assessment, so we are getting that metric incorporated into our process at that level. But I think I asked John Govan yesterday if he knew when he made that statement about their encounter rate dropping in the EFP boats, whether it also dropped in non-EFP boats in the commercial fishery. And I would be curious to know that. He said he thought you might know or might be able to find that out. But that would be an interesting statistic to have.
Yeah, and Mr. Chairman, Linda, we can certainly compare our observer data to the extent that we have it with the results of the EFP, and that should provide some indication in terms of what we're observing and if there does seem to be a difference between EFP and non-EFP vessels. I think we probably have enough vessels in both of those categories that we could make some form of comparison.
That'd be great. Thank you.
All right. Thanks very much for that, Glenn. That was very helpful. So I'm going to ask Adam to come up here and provide us a status of progress on confirming MSAB membership, and then seeing if there are gaps and what process maybe we wish to follow to fill those gaps.
Good morning. Thanks very much, Commissioner Ryle. So my name is Adam Kaiser. I'm one of the co-chairs of the MSAB or MSAB. Michelle, please.
Yes, thank you. Michelle Culver, the other co-chair of the MSAB.
So we were requested to provide an update on MSAB membership. There's a couple of points that we'd like to flag with commissioners. Over the past 6 weeks or so, we've reached out to the existing membership to see whether or not they're interested in continuing to participate in the process. We've done that because under our draft terms of reference that we shared at the commissioner work meeting and at the interim meeting, it was proposed that they would come up for renewal in this calendar year in 2017. It was just an informal note out to members. We're happy to report, though, that the existing membership, almost all the existing membership that have been participating regularly, are interested in continuing to participate. We have identified a few vacancies, namely maybe 1 to 2 commercial representatives, at least one from Canada. We are missing a Canadian processor representative and a Canadian recreational harvester representative. The reason I'm a bit wishy-washy on the total number of vacancies is the new proposed terms of reference that the Commission has put forward provides a range for different sectors, and so we're trying to figure out how we fit within that range. One point of note is we are anticipating a change in North Pacific Fisheries Council membership, and I think that's going to be confirmed in May. Is that right, Michelle? I think there's also a question Alan mentioned about distribution. We've gone through the existing membership, and right now there are interests from Area 4, 3A, 3B, 2C, 2B, and some commercial 2A representatives. The distribution is across all regulatory areas, but that distribution is mostly limited to commercial harvesters. Given there's only 2 to 4 seats for recreational harvesters, it's not possible at the moment to have a recreational harvester from each regulatory area. That said, it doesn't, it's not a concern to me as one of the co-chairs. I think it's a challenging task to find a balance between having broad representation but keeping the group at a manageable size. And that's one recommendation that Michelle and I would have with the revised terms of reference, is to add back the note about maintaining a group size of 15 to 20 individuals. Right now the proposed terms of reference have anywhere from 18 to 30 individuals participating in the board, and I think that may be a bit too large to keep us progressing at a reasonable rate. Maybe I'll pause there. See, Michelle, if you have any additions for the existing membership?
Just the other thing I would note is just in looking at the geographic and sector representation, we also don't seem to have a representative from Alaska recreational fisheries, but our understanding is that may be a possibility for the replacement from the North Pacific Fishery Management Council representative. So we may identify that as a vacancy in the future depending on who the North Pacific Council chooses.
There's a couple of other points of note, if I may, with respect to membership in the new terms of reference that I think should be brought to the Commissioner's attention. The changes specifically are that there's no longer ex officio positions on the board. I don't think it's really a big deal, but it is a change from how we were originally structured. Commission staff now have official seats on the board, but there's no commissioner seat on the board. Presumably commissioners are going to continue to participate, I would hope so, but it's not explicitly noted in the terms of reference. So our recommendation with respect to filling the vacancies that I identified at the beginning of this was that we have Conference Board and PAG put forward some nominations to staff to fill these seats. We just spoke with Conference Board this morning, and we can see if they'd be interested in putting forward a suggestion. Maybe not at this meeting, but the chairs could put something forward perhaps between now and our May meeting. That, frankly, is a gap in the MSAB process. Is there is no clear appointment process to fill any vacancies that arise.
Thank you. And then just one other thing that I would add in the general rules of procedure that you have before you, or you will be considering, it's clearly described as the advisory bodies are advisory to the Commission, and it lists the MSAB as one of those advisory bodies. But we would note that in the proposed revisions under Item 1 in Appendix 5, terms of reference for the MSAB specifically, it says the second sentence that the primary role of the MSAB is to oversee and advise the IPHC Secretariat staff. And so we would just note that there seems to be a conflict between being advisory to the Commission versus advisory to staff. And previously, in our terms of reference, we were advisory to the Commission, which is what our preference would be.
So that was we just pulled this together last minute, so I'm sorry that it's a bit all over the place. Quick summary. There are some vacancies. We think we have an option to fill those vacancies. We're going to solicit some input from Conference Board and PAG. The distribution of membership is across the geographic, or across all the regulatory areas. There are a number of changes to the terms of reference. I think David Wilson has proposed that we discuss any potential revisions at our subsequent meeting in May. We've flagged what we think are a few of the highlights, and we can make time on our May agenda to flesh out those concerns.
Okay, thanks, Adam and Michelle. Any questions? Linda?
A question around the process of reviewing participation and requesting whether people are continuing to want to stay on the board. So do you have people who haven't showed up? Alan said there's some folks he's never even met. If they say, oh yes, I want to stay on, how are you handling that?
Thanks. Well, actually, those who haven't showed up also have not responded to our survey. So that's not a difficult task.
Maybe I'll just see if I can provide a summary of some of our comments that we had earlier, and anyone correct me from the Commission where I go wrong. But I guess as an opening statement, I think the MSAB process itself is going to have some important bearing on a number of factors that will come to the Commission. And the reason for asking for the report back for you today was to understand where there would be vacancies, how we would fill those vacancies, and to make sure there's a good cross-section of representation from, I would say, all regulatory areas and also from sectors where required as well. And so in thinking about ensuring that we have full and active membership, glad to hear that you have embarked upon confirming that membership. It sounds like there will be some vacancies that will come forward. It would seem, I think, I'll propose this, Jim, and see if I get this right, is that they should come to the Commission to see how we want to fill those vacancies. Adam, I think, just mentioned raising this at Conference Board and PAG at this meeting. I think would be a good step to get input from both of those advisory groups about how to fill any vacancies. And if Adam and Michelle made the same report they just did to us on the status, and they could get some feedback on filling membership in advance of waiting till sometime after this meeting. I think everyone's here, and I think we should do what we can here to fill those vacancies. And then once we have a complete list of the membership, then I think it should come to the Commission to, I guess, agree. And that, as far as the terms of reference goes, there's a couple of items that Adam and Michelle flagged that I guess we should think about and provide some guidance back. So if I've missed anything or you have any disagreement. Yes, Linda.
Maybe just a question to you as chair is where would we take up providing the kind of clarification they've requested around whether they're reporting to the Secretariat or to the Commission?
Well, I think we could have that discussion now if we like, but I think Dave was going to have a comment too.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'd just like to point out that we're actually presenting the amendment to the Rules of Procedure under Agenda Item 10.5, which is at 1:30 tomorrow. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Dave. So why don't we leave it until there then, Linda, if that makes sense, Jim?
So I believe Adam mentioned that they were talking about rotating membership or defining term limits, and I'm not quite sure where that ended up, or whether we'd have that discussion some other time, or we're happy with it, bring it up another year, what they called a life sentence for these people, whether we should have some discussion on that. I'm happy to let it go another year after we get new people in, but it's up to you. Just wondered what you thought.
Yeah, and a follow-up question to that too would be for Adam and Michelle. Are we having these staggered, or is everyone all disappearing at the same time?
So 2 points. One is the length and then staggered. I think there is a desire to have them staggered. It's not explicitly clear in the terms of reference. We're fortunate in that nobody that has been actively participating is leaving, so it hasn't been an issue yet, but it's something that we, when we come together in our newly constituted group in May, that we can affirm that there is a staggering of those on the steering committee and co-chair, etc. With respect to the term lengths, at the work meeting in September, the guidance from commissioners, I believe, was that we have 4-year term lengths. Personally, I'm not that concerned. I think the revised terms of reference stated as 2 years, or suggests 2 years. Again, in practice, it's not that big of a deal if it's 4 years or 2 years. What's something that is important for the MSAB is that we've talked about the need for long-term participation in the process. 2 and 4 years is too short for long-term. So the idea is that when you participate in the process, you're there for the long haul. Maybe it's better to save the rest of the discussion though for the terms of reference discussion. I don't want to derail your conversation.
Yeah, thanks very much, Adam. I think it would be good to leave it till, did you say it was tomorrow? Yeah, 1:30 tomorrow. So why don't we bring that back and we can decide there when we have the discussion around the terms of reference. Adam, have you I imagine, as you said, you haven't had a chance to document all this, but I think it would be helpful if you put together just a short report that you can provide to us. I mean, I made notes, but I probably didn't get it all. And then we can provide that to all commissioners. All right, thanks very much. Carrying on with agency reports, the next report, I believe, is from the Alaska Department of Fish and Game.
Pointe is the RP and the other patrol group guys have more information or that are available to provide more information and talk about bycatch. We want to do that as a part of the NIMSA Alaska report.
Oh, I see. Commissioners' views?
Mr. Chairman, I think we should hear them. To me, it's not particularly out of order. Alaska Department of Fish and Game fits in as well, but I think before they came here and we should hear it.
Hear it now or after?
I am indifferent about the order.
Okay, so let's see. You see, we're very decisive this morning. Let's hear from you now, please. Thanks.
Good morning, and thank you. This presentation is different than the agency report that's in your files, which is AR11. And that was a letter to the IPHC that we send every year in November, and it's focused on the recent year and the prior year and the estimates that go in that are used by the stock assessment. So what I want to do in this talk is instead give a a more general overview and let you see the recent estimates in the context of historical trends, et cetera. So the information that Alaska Department of Fish and Game provides to the IPHC each year includes the numbers of halibut harvested, or estimates of the numbers of halibut harvested and released, and that's by sector and area, the sectors being charter versus non-charter and by regulatory area. We also provide estimates of average weight by each of those by each sector in each area, and you put those together to get the sport harvest, and we also estimate release mortality excuse me, in pounds. And for the current year, the estimates are preliminary, just like a lot of the other estimates that the IPHC deals with. And so the conclusions about whether the charter sector or exceeded or by how much their allocation are also preliminary. Those percentage overages or underages can also change once the estimates are finalized the following year. In addition to the harvest, thank you, Tom. In addition to the harvest, we also provide estimates of the sport harvest that's prior to the mean date of the IPHC survey for in areas 2C and 3A, and that's used by Dr. Webster in the survey CPUE adjustment. And then on request, in the past, we have provided information on length composition of the sport harvest and age and sex composition in area 3A only. We don't collect that information in 2C. Okay, and the sources for these data, there are three main sources. The first is the charter logbook. This is a mandatory logbook completed by charter operators after each trip, and they record numbers of fish harvested and released, not just halibut, but a number of state-managed species as well. Our logbook is unique as far as we can tell in that they're required to report this harvest for each individual angler along with their license number. If they're an unlicensed angler, they just designate them as youth. And we've used the logbook. The logbook since 2014 has been the approved accounting tool. It was implemented as part of the catch sharing plan that it was the preferred accounting tool for the charter harvest. We also get estimates from a statewide mail survey. This is a survey that's administered statewide for all species, freshwater and saltwater. It includes halibut and has since 1977. It's survey questionnaires are mailed to a stratified random sample of in the neighborhood of 45 to 47,000 licensed anglers, and they're asked to report for their whole household. We send follow-up mailings to people who don't respond and use the responses from those follow-up mailings to estimate non-response bias, which is a tendency for less avid anglers to not respond to the survey. And this is what we're now using for the unguided estimates, or we've always used it for the unguided estimates. But so our charter harvest estimates now come from the logbook and have since 2014, and the mail surveys used for the unguided harvest. And then our third big data source is the creel sampling at all the major ports in areas 2C and 3A. It's a total of 17 ports that you see highlighted on the map there. And just to highlight from 2016, our samplers measured 10,637 halibut in area 2C and 6,400 some halibut in area 3A. And those represent roughly, they measured roughly 8% of the harvest in area 2C and about 2.3% in area 3A. Now just some general information about Alaska sport fisheries. In 2015, the state sold about 479,000 licenses to both residents and non-residents. all anglers age 16 and older are required to be licensed. About 60% of those licenses went to non-residents. So this is just general sport information. We don't know exactly how many of those licenses were used. Actually, we have pretty good numbers for the charter sector from the logbook, and I'll get to that in a second here. In terms of saltwater effort, anglers spent about 970,000 angler days of effort in saltwater for all fin fish, and that's an estimate from the statewide harvest survey. I'll have some more halibut specific in the next slide. So this is information just on the charter sector, and it comes from 2015. It's all from the logbook. There were 561 active sport fishing businesses statewide in saltwater in 2015, a little over 1,200 active guides, and 999 active vessels. And specific to halibut, there were 490 charter vessels that harvested at least one halibut in Area 2C, 381 that operated in 3A only, 24 vessels that operated in both areas. There are some businesses in northern and southeast that have permits in both areas. And then you see relatively low charter effort in western Alaska, a total of 5 in areas 3B and 4. As I said, these data are based on a charter logbook that's administered by ADF&G, and this is probably a good time to mention that we're also piloting an electronic version. It'd be an electronic option of that logbook. We're piloting it this year and anticipating full implementation next year. The electronic version collects exactly the same data as the paper logbook. For now, when we're planning potential enhancements in the future to make it more usable, such as barcoding licenses, so the operators can just scan the licenses to enter them into the electronic logbook rather than writing down license numbers and potentially transposing digits. Also, like a dashboard or a way for the operator to go and look at their own data, to log in and look at their own data. Number of enhancements like that planned. And then I worked up some numbers just to give you an idea about actual participation in the halibut fishery. In Area 2C from 2012 to 2015, we had a range of 21,000 to 30,000 licensed anglers harvested halibut, harvested at least one halibut. In Area 3A, it was in the range of 68,000 to 78,000. Jumping to the harvest trends now. These are the harvest trends since 2006 in Area 2C for the charter sector. Number of features in the graph here. The open squares are estimates from the statewide harvest survey, which we used through 2013. From 2014 on, the solid black squares are estimates from the logbook. And the estimates from 2014 on also include release mortality. The error bars are 95% confidence intervals, and the green line represents either the charter GHL, which was effective through 2013, or the allocation under the catch sharing plan, which started in 2014. So you can see the harvest in relation to the GHL. Some salient features are the big drop in harvest in 2009, which was a result of implementing a 1 fish bag limit. It was 2 fish before that. And another big drop in 2011. You can see where the number of years there where the charter harvest was significantly above the GHL, and then in 2011 the IPHC implemented the 37-inch maximum size limit. And then from 2012 on, we had council review and recommendations for the charter fishery, which has brought the fishery back close to the allocation, and it's been under the allocation 2 of the last 3 years in Area 2C. In the non-charter fishery in Area 2C, that's the solid black squares and the black line. In the background there in gray, you see the charter harvest from the previous slide, just for comparison. And the non-charter fishery, as you know, is not part of the CSP, so it's an other removal. An interesting feature of the graph here is that since 2011, the unguided harvest has exceeded the guided harvest and has increased probably close to 80% since 2011, but it's really not that much higher than it was in 2008, but it does seem to be on an upward trend. Again, the 2016 estimate there is a preliminary number. It's just a time series forecast. There's no in-season data that's used to come up with that number, so there's a lot of uncertainty on that number. Jumping to 3A, you see a little different picture here. As before, it's statewide harvest survey estimates through 2013, and then the solid black series from 2014 on is from the logbook and includes release mortality. And you can see that prior to the implementation of the catch sharing plan, the charter fishery was generally below the GHL. It was above 1 year, 2007. And the last 3 years, 3A has been above the allocation by anywhere from 9 to 16%, though it is coming down, getting closer. And Area 3 unguided fishery, again, this is a pretty different picture than 2C. In the long term, the unguided harvest appears more stable, possibly even a long-term, slightly declining trend, and it is still less than the charter harvest. And jumping to Western Alaska, areas 3B and 4. Now out here, the fishery is quite small, and the charter sector is not included in the CSP, so we just estimate total sport removals. We don't break it apart by sector. We use the mail survey to get these estimates, and we don't have any creel sampling programs for average weight out here, so we just follow the precedent set by the IPHC, which is to multiply the numbers of fish by the average weight from Kodiak, the closest sampled port. Probably does underestimate the size of these fish a bit. But these harvest graphs here are in numbers of fish, and you can see it's really lately just in the hundreds of fish. It's quite small harvest. As I mentioned before, we also estimate release mortality, and release mortality is estimated by applying assumed mortality rates for different hook types and weighting them by the numbers of fish released on those hook types, which is information we gather during the creel survey interviews. And we also, I wouldn't say we estimate average weight. We don't have any data on the sizes of released fish, so we use modeling with the available data we have to generate what we hope are reasonable estimates of average weight. And they have these estimates have nice properties in that when the average size of fish harvested goes up, the average size of released fish goes up, which is what you'd expect. And the average size has to, in the modeling exercise, it has to generate numbers of released fish that matches what we get from the logbook. That's kind of hard to explain, but if you want more detail, I can show you later. But the take-home message here is that the release mortality actually represents a relatively small part of the total removals, about 3 to 3.5% in Area 2C, and about less than 2% in Area 3A, and it's really negligible in Western Alaska because the harvest is so small. And that's all I have for now. I do want to acknowledge there's a ton of people that work on the logbook and guide registration and the sampling programs, and one of them, Barbie Failer, who runs the Area 3A port sampling program, is in the audience, and she's available to answer questions about 3A. And with that, I'll be happy to entertain questions, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thanks very much, Scott. Any questions, Linda?
Thank you. Scott, I wonder if you could talk about what information is collected in the charter logbook.
Certainly. Mr. Chairman, Ms. Benkin. So the charter logbook requires, before the angler goes out, to list the names and license numbers of each angler before any gear is deployed in the water. Also the date, port of landing. It collects the statistical area that was fished for bottom fish or salmon, the number of hours fished for bottom fish and salmon, and then for each individual angler, the numbers of fish that were kept and released. And then the anglers, if they harvested halibut, are required to sign the logbook to verify that the information that was recorded for them is correct. And there have been we've noticed some problems with that, in that some anglers are signing they're signing at the beginning of the trip before any information is entered, not necessarily knowing what they're signing or what it means. The electronic version of the logbook fixes that, in that the angler can't certify their catch until there's actually some halibut catch entered for them. There's a number of enhancements in the electronic version that should speed the input, the receipt of that data with much less error in editing, and so we're looking forward to that. But that's basically the information content. So we get some spatial information and very specific harvest information. And by having that harvest information at the angler level, we can evaluate things like the effects of annual limits, which you can't really do very well with the male survey data.
Any other questions for Scott? Scott, is the intention to have the electronic monitoring mandatory, or is it a voluntary program? I missed what you said.
Mr. Chairman, the logbook itself is mandatory. It's required for every charter trip in the state. The electronic version will be just an option to record electronically. If you still want, you'll still be required to carry a paper logbook in case your electronic device fails. But you have the choice of electronic versus paper, and what we would like to do is make the electronic version so usable that that's where the majority of, I mean, there's always going to be somebody who would prefer paper, but if we could get the vast majority of people using the electronic version with its enhancements and for usability, then that would give us more data and better data faster.
Is there a trend in license sales in Alaska? I think you had, what, 480,000 recreational licenses in combination, but is there a trend over the years? Up, down, stable?
Mr. Chairman, I believe, I haven't looked at this in a while, but I believe the long-term trend is a slight decline. It may have leveled off in the last couple of years, but I'm not really sure. That information is readily available on our website. There's, I think, figures where you can look at those trends.
All right. Not seeing any more questions. Thank you very much, Scott, for your report. So the next report would be from Noah on the law enforcement. Oh, for Martina. Are they on a time constraint? Okay. Yeah. So let's go ahead with the law enforcement from Noah, please.
Good morning. I'm Lieutenant Robert Marbell with the NOAA Office of Law Enforcement in Juneau, Alaska, and I am the Supervisory Enforcement Officer for Southeast Alaska. A common theme you're going to see throughout my brief slideshow is the fact that we have had an increase in our staff for the enforcement officers. We've got 5 new officers in the field this year. Throughout 2016, we staffed booths at various events like the Great Alaska Sportsman Show, State Fair in Haines, the Pacific Marine Expo in Seattle, Whale Fest in Sitka, and then daily interaction with the public and industry to provide information on regulations and clarification. For 2016, we had a little bit of an increase in some of the violations that we found, and there again, it's due to the fact that we have more staff in the field. NOAA Office of Law Enforcement investigated numerous violations of the subsistence, charter, commercial, and sport halibut fishing regulations. This is an increase from previous years due to the fact that we went from having 5 officers in the field throughout the state and added 5 more, giving us 10. And we have 5 more in the academy right now that will be in the field this next year. Some of the main increases there were with charter halibut fishing, and this is mainly due to the fact that with the staffing and the charter logbook audit from 2015, we found various violations of over annual limit, incorrect charter halibut permits, and then just other logbook errors throughout that audit. The 2016 regulations were corrected to fix the fact that anglers were not required in 2015 to note their harvest of halibut on the back of their angler license. So the guides didn't necessarily know that an angler would have hit their annual limit at that point unless the guide had the angler with them throughout the week. For patrols and inspections, we had over 4,000 hours of patrol hours documented, and again, the increase is due to the fact that we have more officers in the field, and this shows a reflection in concurrence with that, fact that we have more patrol people. The NOAA Office of Law Enforcement enforcement officers and special agents opened over 2,800 investigations in 2016, finding a total of 1,741 violations. 602 of these were halibut related. The percentage of violations remained about the same in previous years. There was a 1% difference, so compliance is really the same, just we're finding more due to the fact that we're out there more. Majority of the charter violations there again are due to the logbook audit and increase of field personnel. One of the common things that we came up with throughout our patrols were the fact that the chunked halibut, halibut other than in-hole fillets with skin on, and this was throughout Alaska, but mainly in southeast Alaska, where we conducted an 18-day patrol with the troopers that I'll talk about here too. More examples of the chunked halibut. There's no way to determine a daily catch or possession limit with these. We conducted various joint operations with the wildlife troopers throughout Alaska. And then we did a 18-day patrol with the use of the 85-foot patrol vessel, the Enforcer, which is an Alaska Wildlife Trooper boat in Icy Strait. Along with that, the National Park Rangers from Glacier Bay National Park participated. So we basically boarded everything we saw in that 4-day period, whether it was in the park or out in state waters, and we even went up into Area 3A during a day closure just to confirm that nobody was fishing that day. And I would like to just end with that, just again saying that a lot of these changes were the fact that we have more staff in the field, and with the staffing plan adding 5 more, expect the patrol hours and potential violations to increase a little bit, or just the compliance rate to increase, because we'll be out there answering questions and seeing the public more.
Thanks very much, Robert. Any questions for Robert on the enforcement report? Linda.
Question on the angler writing down fish on the back of their license, and I understand that's used for where we have an annual limit in place for halibut. Is that required in any other saltwater fisheries? Are there limits to where the angler is writing down that they catch a fish on the back of the license, or is this really new to Alaska anglers?
Ma'am, for federal fisheries, it's new, but the state requires it for, I believe the king salmon is the main one, but there may be others that are state regulations that I don't know about. So.
Thank you.
Bob?
Yes, sir. You mentioned a number of 10 enforcement and 5 being trained, and maybe bringing on some more. Are these personnel just employed for halibut IFQ charter enforcement, or are they also used for groundfish, other groundfish activity, which are not necessarily halibut related?
Yes, sir. So we're not just limited to just charter halibut or sport halibut. We are enforcing all of the federal fisheries regulations and all the marine mammal protection laws. So it's a huge range there, and depending on the area you're looking at, there's multiple different fisheries that we're training on.
Any other questions for Robert? Thank you very much for your report. I'm going to suggest we take a 15-minute break now and get back together at 5:02. We're going to reconvene. What I understand is that the folks from Alaska Wildlife Troopers are currently not available. So if that changes, we'll bring them forward. But for now, I think we would, as process, adopt their report as the commission. And if they're available, we'll come back to it, Jim, if that makes sense. And we're going to hear a brief introduction from Rachel and around, and go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. Again, Rachel Baker with the National Marine Fisheries Service Alaska region. And I did want to give a brief introduction to the next presentation you will receive. As we talked about earlier today, the Council and NMFS did take action earlier in 2016 to reduce the halibut PSC limits in the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands groundfish fisheries. And when the Council recommended this PSC limit reduction, it was in June 2015, it also requested that the Amendment 80 or non-pollock trawl catcher processor sector develop halibut PSC management plans for the following year's fishery for presentation to the Council and the public. And the council intended for the management plans to describe the methods that the Amendment 80 sector would use to accommodate the reduced PSC limit, and also methods it might be able to use to bring PSC levels below the limit. And so in December 2015 and December 2016, the Amendment 80 cooperatives presented their reports to the council and to the public at the meetings. And so this past December, representatives of the Amendment 80 sector presented this report, which I understand is essentially the same report that they will be providing to you today. And so essentially, my understanding of the report is that it's on the strategies and methods the fleet used to reduce halibut PSC in 2016, and just, again, the various approaches that they used. And so today, we have Dr. Mark Fina from one of the Amendment 80 companies, U.S. Seafoods, and also Chris Woodley, who's Executive Director of Groundfish Forum, which is an association of Amendment 80 companies. So I will turn it over to them.
Well, welcome, Mark and Chris. I'll turn it over to you.
Good morning, I'm Mark, and this is Chris. And the report that we're going to give has information from two co-ops. With the two co-ops in there, some of the data are separated by co-op, some of them are aggregated. I'll try to make sure we follow along so that you see that. But the two co-ops represent all of the Amendment 80 fleet, which is all of the offshore bottom trawl fishery catcher processor sector in the Bering Sea. There is one limited access fishery in the Bering Sea for yellowfin sole that involves some vessels, and then there's also a limited access fishery in the Aleutian Islands for Atka mackerel and Pacific Ocean perch that involves a few vessels that are not part of our sector. Those are roughly 10% or less of the total for the species, so they're a small share of the overall. This really is the lion's share of the bottom trawl offshore fishery in the Bering Sea. And then they're also, just so you're familiar with it, the only other significant bottom trawl fishery in the Bering Sea is the catcher vessel cod fishery, and that's a significant fishery. That's also not included in this presentation. So I've separated it into two parts. One, I'll give you a little bit about our 2016 performance. The second is I'll talk about a halibut avoidance plan that we put in place at the request of the council. This is for the Alaska Seafood Co-op. It shows our performance in Area 4CDE, which has been the area of most attention lately. It shows what we averaged for halibut usage in the right-hand column in metric tons. The middle column is our rate, which is kilograms of halibut per metric ton of ground fish catch. You can see that our 28 to 2014 average usage was almost 1,200 tons, and we've ratcheted that down. We're now a little bit above 1,000 in 2016. Our rate of usage has come down with that. The next slide gives you a little bit more information about kind of how we get to where we got to. This is overall usage in the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands. You can see our ground fish catch is a little bit below average last year. In 2015, it was below by about 20,000 tons. You can see also that our rate has continued down overall from about 6 kilograms per metric ton to 4.5 kilograms per metric ton in 2016. Our ground fish per tow is down. The reason I put that up there is that that's one of the things that we do to avoid halibut is do some small tows when we move into a new area to try to assess what our halibut bycatch rate is before we really start fishing. Overall usage, you can see, is down about 400 tons from our 2008 to 2014 average. This is the other co-op in our sector, and you can see this is their overall usage in the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands. They're down from almost 700 tons in 2014 to below 300 tons in 2016. And in the next slide, I combined them all. They're still aggregated. I aggregated from both co-ops in the two different in the 4CD management area and in 4A and 4B combined. So you can see that we're down over 600 tons since 2014 to last year. That's about a third. And then in 4A and 4B, we're down by over 100 tons, again, down by about a third since 2014. And I'll leave that up for a second because I think some of you are writing. Our halibut avoidance practice, this is kind of how we got to where we are. We've got an agreement in our co-op to take on these different measures. It's not a, it's more of a guidance document that we use than a set of strict rules, I would say. What we've found in our fisheries is that strict rules, we tend to find too many exceptions, and I'll give you an easy example. We use excluders very commonly, but there are times when it's probably not a great idea to use an excluder if you're in a very clean fishing area and you're going to lose 30% of your target catch or 40% of your target catch by putting an excluder on. You're probably better off to fish without one. It'll improve your halibut rate overall because you'll catch your target in a clean circumstance. So we recommend using excluders, but we're not rigid in saying you have to use one, and that's just an example. So fishing target choice is one thing. You can, if you find that a target's not working well, move on to another one. Change the locations. Sometimes we don't fish in certain targets during certain times of the day. We also recommend a small tows when you enter an area. We recommend considering using an excluder, although it's not a fast rule. There's a good amount of vessel-to-vessel communication that we encourage in our fleet. We have weekly bycatch calls to discuss what people are seeing on the grounds, and captains discuss things like water temperature, how effective are excluders, what are, what's the catch composition looking like with respect to bycatch species. And we also, as you heard yesterday, we have a deck sorting program that now it will allow any Amendment 80 vessel to deck sort. Not all the vessels are in it, although I will say that some of the vessels that are not in it are achieving rates comparable to vessels in the deck sorting, primarily through use of the other tools above. I'd say a large part of that is using excluders and getting very effective use out of their excluders. This is a little bit more heading toward our halibut avoidance plan. We took a 25% cut in our cap starting in 2016. The council took action in 2015. They directed our co-op to define avoidance practices, which is I just discussed on the previous slide. They asked us to assess our performance in the fishery and also asked us to create halibut reduction incentives to make sure that we're consistently working to reduce our halibut bycatch mortality. We put it together a plan. The goal is to ensure that we're using best available operational practices to avoid halibut and reduce mortality. The plan's agreed to by all vessels in the sector in both co-ops. The key components of this are we have an annual standard that vessels are that's set for vessels. If you don't meet the standard, you get a monetary penalty, which ranges from, for the annual standard, it's $50,000 to $100,000 for a violation of it. We have a fourth quarter standard that combines all the halibut-rich targets, and those penalties in that are range from $25,000 to $50,000 per violation. Penalties aggregate. If you violate both of them, you're going to get 2 penalties. We also have kind of a follow-on provision which applies quarterly monitoring if you miss the annual test. So if you fail an annual test one year in a target fishery, the following year you're going to we'll look at you on a quarterly basis, and in that testing, if you fail on a quarterly basis, you are penalized by taking away part of your halibut cap. And what we do is reduce your halibut cap by the amount of halibut you burned by exceeding the cap. So we just look at what was your actual rate and what halibut did you burn at your actual rate? What would your rate have been if you complied with our standard? Take the difference, and that's your penalty. As I said, the annual test that we have, we looked at this as a way to eliminate outliers. You'll see on the next slide that we have had vessels that have been kind of outside the range of what we consider to be a normal range in our fleet for halibut bycatch. So we use that as kind of the starting point for figuring out what our rate is, and what we've done in the 3 targets that you see up there, yellowfin sole, rock sole, and the aggregated target of flathead sole and arrowtooth flounder. We set target halibut PSC rates or standards, and if you need to achieve these standards, we also ratchet them down each year for the first 3 years of the program. So I only show you the 2016 and 17 rates that we have, but they'll be coming down again in 2018. And on the following slide, we did a retrospective analysis looking at data from 2008 to 2015. On average, 4 vessels failed to meet the 2016 standards if you look back at that time period, and on average the fines would have been over $250,000 had we had this program in place during those years. In 2016, all vessels met the standard and all of the targets that we have. So we've clearly brought some boats in down with respect to their halibut PSC rates. We had 1 vessel this year that had the 2017 standard been in place, it wouldn't have met the standard in one of the fisheries. So there would have been a penalty for that boat. Next year, if it does the same performance it did this year, it'd get penalized. We're hoping that doesn't happen. The other part of the test that I want to talk about that was in place this year is the 4th quarter test. We aggregate all the flatfish species and look at them in aggregate and set a target, set a standard that they need to meet. In the 4th quarter, it's largely a yellowfin sole target, but we just decided that we would aggregate all of them as a way to kind of keep the overall compliance in place. So the number you're looking at is really a yellowfin sole, and that is our average rate of all vessels, from, I believe it's the 2000, I'm going to get the number wrong, but it's like a 2010 to 2012 period, or 2008 to 2012 period. So we chose an average rate for our fleet and said we need to stay under that for all boats, because we had seen, and the council had seen, a spike at the year end, and that is likely a factor of, if you have a non-binding cap and you're getting to the end of the year and you know you've got a lot of excess halibut, why not just use it? Why stay an extra day or 2 away from home if you've got extra cap to work with? This test is designed to prevent that from happening. So we're applying penalties to anybody who exceeds this catch standard, or the mortality standard. So the goal was to prevent that late year spike, and I think we did a reasonable job of doing that in this year. We had, if you look at this slide, 5 vessels on average failed to meet the standard from 2008 to 2015. So again, we have a cap that would have resulted in penalties had we applied it in the past, a limit, and also the annual fines would have been about $140,000 on average. This year, all the vessels met the standard. And that's really all I had in the presentation. I think, we as you heard yesterday, we've got the deck sorting program extending into next year and this year, and we're continuing to move forward on that, and we are continuing to tinker with excluders and work together to try and keep these numbers down. Thanks.
Thank you very much, and as you mentioned, the report last year about the deck sorting was very interesting as well. Any questions? Bob?
Yeah, Mark, your one chart up there showed, I think it was landings, I assume they're landings of about 243,000 metric tons. I'm off maybe a couple there, but
you're in the neighborhood, yeah.
So, and you said that was off by about 20,000 tons. So was that due to
no from so the 2008 to 14 average was about 248. In 2015 we were down, I'm going to say around 220 or 220,000 metric tons. Last year we were 244,000. So we were down 4 last year. The previous year we were down about 20. So this year we got some ground back.
Okay.
I would say, you know, we fished longer to get there. I think, you know, a lot of boats stayed in the Bering Sea for a longer period of time. I think the deck sorting and excluder use both cost us some time in fishing. I think our crews on our big boat feel that it's about a tow a day they lose. On some of the other boats in our fleet, some of the people have looked at it and they feel like it's about a half a tow a day. So, in doing 5 tows a day, say, you're losing 10 to 20% of your catch volume on a daily basis, but so you fish longer to make that up.
So there's still some TAC available.
Yeah, there still is TAC available in the flatfish targets in particular. Yeah, we do leave fish on the table.
Any other questions? So yesterday we heard from John, and he mentioned the figures he just spoke about as well. What I was wondering, he also said, John said 12 of 19 boats were participating. Was that in the deck sorting? But what you've just presented is all boats are participating in these other methods? But
that's correct. All boats are authorized to participate in deck sorting now. Last year, 12 participated. I know that my company had 3 boats get into the deck sorting program last year of the 4 catcher processors we have. The 4th one is scheduled to go into it again early this year. There's another boat that I believe is scheduled to enter the deck sorting shortly after ours does. So at least 2 more will be coming in right in the beginning of the year. But everybody is. The boats that haven't been doing deck sorting are working with excluders and participating in those calls that I described, and so it's not everybody's using every tool all the time. It's kind of a mixed bag on the tools. You use the ones that you feel are the most effective for what where you are and what's happening in your fishery.
Mr. Commissioner, I just wanted to quickly respond to Mr. Alverson's question in a little bit more detail regarding leaving TAC on the table. The last several years, the flatfish tax, which is where most of our halibut bycatch occurs, has steadily been coming down. They were reduced again this year as well, and we feel that where they are set this year, we'll be very, very close to fully achieving those flatfish tax. I just wanted to clarify that there was another cut for the 2017 season.
And that's not a symptom of halibut usage. It's about the tax setting process that we go through on a normal basis every year, and the 2 million metric ton cap, and how the dynamic works out between the pollock fleet, allocating to the pollock fleet, allocating to our fleet, and then allocating to the other users, longline cod, say.
Do you have a view of the methods that you're using? It's kind of a mixture of incentives and, I guess, penalties, for lack of a better word, of what's working. You mentioned in your previous statement that people are kind of making a choice and whatever works for them, but out of all that range of activities that you packaged of various tools that you've put together, do you have a view on what's working for the majority of the fleet? And
I think they all bring different benefits. I mean, clearly, and I think John may have spoken to this yesterday, if we go into an area and you're deck sorting, I mean, it doesn't mean you don't look at what you're catching. So you may go into an area, and if you're getting unacceptably high amounts of halibut in the net, you can't go on with that. You can't sort there's a limit to what you can sort and effectively return to the water in deck sorting, and maintain a reasonable viability rate on the ones that are going back in. You just can't have an unlimited. So you need to pay attention to your halibut, the halibut that are coming on when you're deck sorting. Likewise with an excluder, you can still go into areas and find, even though you got your excluder on and you're trying to work with your excluder, it's not effective. You've got to move to a better area. So I think overall, I mean, the starting point is paying attention to what you're bringing up in your net and monitoring that closely. But beyond that, I think there are times when some people feel like an excluder's as good as they're going to do. When you start a deck sorting trip, you're in deck sorting full on. You get a mortality rate that's higher in your factory. So once you enter deck sorting, I think you're living in that world. And some people use excluders while they deck sort, others don't. It depends on what you're seeing in your fishery. So it's hard to say that this is the best and this is not. And we see, like I said in the beginning, we see some boats that are not in deck sorting that are doing just as well as anybody in deck sorting. And then, so it's a real mixed bag in terms of what you do. And to kind of take one more step back, I know that we have our smallest boat's 125 feet, our biggest boat's almost 300 feet. And the excluders on those two different boats are entirely different. They operate differently because of the size of the boat, the towing power, and the horsepower of the boat. And so even, when people say I have an excluder on my boat, it means one thing to one guy and one thing to another just because of the dynamics of the operation.
Jay? Mr. Chair, thank you.
I mean, we think that's a critical part of what goes on is the vessel-to-vessel communications with captains. If you're just starting to fish and you're entering a new area to fish and you're entering a new fishery, if you're coming from somewhere else and you're entering it, it's helpful to know what you're walking into. So we feel like it's a pretty critical part.
Linda?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm sure you said this, Mark, but I missed it. So with the penalties, can you remind me if those are, if somebody exceeds, there's a penalty, are those imposed, is that an agreement people are signing that's for people at your company? Is that for people in the co-op? Those are legal contracts, I expect, and I just wondered if any of them have had to be put to the test.
At this stage, we've had no one trigger a penalty, and they are agreements that are signed by all the co-op members. So it's all the different companies that are in the co-op. It's company responsibility. One other thing that I didn't mention is that we don't have a specific designation for penalties that we collect, but our agreement at this point is we will use any penalty revenues to fund bycatch research. And we don't think you can designate a specific project till you, one, have money, and two, know how much money you have. We continue to pursue research anyway, independent of not collecting any. This will supplement our other expenditures on research if we do get any money. At this point, I would say when we developed this program, we've consistently said that the best of all worlds is no collection. Just get people to where we want them to be in their bycatch, and no money changes hands. That's the goal.
All right, I don't see any more questions, but I appreciate the report from yourself, Mark and Chris.
Okay, thanks for your time.
Thank you.
I think we have a couple more agenda items here before we break. One was, Bob, you'd raised the issue earlier about Area 2A survey. We were going to talk about that. I had written it down to do that on the finance section. We could leave it there if you like, or we can talk about it now. And similarly, we had a piece around apportionment, Linda, and harvest policy. Just recognizing we have a bit of time now, or do we just leave it for the finance and admin piece?
Well, I'm prepared to make a motion on that if you want to take it up now.
I think we got the time, so I'm fine with that.
Okay. So, Mr. Chair, I would move to direct the staff to expand the survey with the use of a finer resolution based on the current 10 by 10 mile survey methodology, such that the area from 100 to 150 fathoms between Nia Bay and the Columbia River is sampled. And if there's a second, I'll speak to that.
I would second that, Bob.
Mr. Chairman, we've heard for probably a decade from the stakeholders in 2A that they do not believe that our survey is truing the true state of the nature in that area. And in fact, we see from one year to the next a variation in our survey numbers that can range on 21 to 24%. This year, last year, the Blue Line produced a 1,060,000 pound level. This year, it would, I think it's 745,000. These fluctuations that in potential harvest in 2A are just devastating based on how many users are out there, and going below 1 million pounds is just very difficult. So we'd like to try to get a better resolution down there. I was approached and it was suggested, well, this may open up other areas for requests like this. And I would say that for me that's probably not the case, particularly in areas where there are large areas that we have our 10-mile square survey, such as Hecate Strait, the W grounds in 3A, Portlock, Albatross, Sandman Reef area in Western Gulf, and Davidson Bank. These 10-mile survey stations actually look quite small in those areas. They're so large geographically. And I think that those surveys in those areas tend to trend in the same direction that the commercial fleet and the sport fleet, when they see abundances or lack of abundances, the surveys tend to trend in the same direction as the commercial and charter boat fleets, where that is not necessarily the case in 2A. So in order to get a finer resolution and try to get some data points that the staff can use in their report, whether they get down to 5-mile squares or 2.5-mile, I'd like the staff to design that themselves and then implement that during 2017.
Thanks, Bob. I wonder, Dave, if it would be maybe appropriate if you or the staff wanted to comment before we, I guess, vote on the motion that Bob put forward.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Commissioner Halverson. In short, it's certainly something that we could accommodate, making the assumptions or indications that you've made that it is a finer grid based on the current survey grid 10 by 10 that we currently use. And the reason for that is to ensure that the information is still usable in the broader stock assessment survey and how that is used in the stock assessment. There are other considerations that we would certainly include in that proposal post-meeting for your final review, such as consultation with relevant agencies to look at protected species interactions to make sure that we can accommodate those. In addition, there would certainly be other logistical elements such as the provision of bait or sourcing of bait at this late stage. But again, that is something that we would include in a written proposal for your consideration so that you understand the full implications in terms of budgetary elements, bycatch elements, and also how that information could be used. So in short, yes, this is something we can, if it's has been moved forward, we can certainly put that proposal together
for your final decision intersessionally. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Dave. Would that be something that you could do at this session, or would that be post this?
Thanks, Chair. There's certainly some things we could do during this meeting, but in terms of broader consultation with the relevant agencies regarding bycatch of yellow-eye and such, that may take a little bit longer, noting that you've pushed for this to occur during 2017. Thanks.
Bob, did you want to see for the preliminary report from the staff, or should we have a vote now?
You asked Bob that question, so I'm not going to answer that, but I would like to say I appreciate the fact that the staff, through the executive director, has worked, or at least reached a conclusion that they will be able to support that. So I appreciate that a great deal, and speaks well to them, I believe.
Mr. Chairman, I'd just then take a vote now, and as the staff develops and needs to come back to us to true this up, then we'll take their recommendations as they come forward.
Yep, okay. So all in favor? I am. Before going on to the next topic, I recognize that there's probably at least one or two questions Steve mentioned to me that someone's been patiently waiting to ask, and so before going to the next topic, we should probably do that as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. From the web audience, there was one question, and it's from Kevin Abina, who actually has left the webinar, but his question is for Dan Hall. And he asks, Dan, do you think that we can realistically rely on the trawl fleet in the Gulf of Alaska to regulate and mitigate their own bycatch levels? Don't you believe that if the trawl fleet had tighter regulations, that their effort and success would be greater?
So that person's left the webinar. Do we post the answers back out, or we just record them?
We can post it in the webinar.
Yeah, I think that.
In the recording.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Dan.
All right, thank you, Commissioner. And, under the current management for the trawl fleet, it's going to be much harder for them to control their bycatch. I think that's a given under a system in which the individual vessels don't have quotas. For example, we've seen experience in other programs that, like we just heard from the Amendment 80 fleet, where receiving quotas through cooperatives, they are much better able to manage their bycatch. I guess the second part of it is higher observer coverage rates can certainly provide the incentive for those individual vessels to do their best, but again, combined with the catch share plans, those typically have been the most successful.
Okay, thanks very much, Dan. Are there any questions from members in the audience for any of the reports they've heard today, or any of the reports they've heard today and yesterday? Nope, I'm not seeing any. Maybe I'd ask you, Linda, if you wanted to introduce the next topic.
I'm happy to do that if you're ready. I have not had a chance to talk to the chairs of the MSAB, but I'll try to phrase the motion in a way that allows that back and forth to happen, and this to be modified as needed. So I would move that we initiate a process to develop alternative biologically based apportionment strategies for consideration by the Commission and its advisory bodies, and that we request the assistance of the MSAB in initiating this process.
Do you need a second from a different country, or does it,
I think
does it
so.
matter?
Well, that, I don't know. Maybe Dave knows.
It's not specified. It's customary.
Yeah, that's what.
I thought it was required.
But I would second that.
Particular languages, what I was writing, and I might have missed some.
Yeah, initiate a process to develop alternative biologically based apportionment strategies for consideration by the Commission and its advisory bodies, and that we request the assistance of the MSAB in initiating that process.
Mr. Chair, I have a question for Linda. Pardon my ignorance here, but could you please clarify for me what you mean by biologically based?
My intent would be that as ideas are developed, that those ideas would reflect the biology of the halibut resource, and that we would not ignore what was happening with the halibut resource in developing those alternative apportionment strategies.
And to go along with the coast-wide model, is that what your intent is? Or would we look at a more a closed area or regulatory area, biological approach?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I think the Commission has decided some time ago that we had moved to the coast-wide model. That decision was made before my time here, certainly. So I'm not addressing or in any way reversing that policy decision. I think that's a separate issue that at this point the MSAB and the Council is working within the framework of the coast-wide model in revisiting the harvest policy, and this is asking them to also provide some suggestions on alternative apportionment strategies.
Okay, thank you for your clarification.
Other questions on the motion? Ted?
I'm just wondering why we're using that. Why are you using the term apportionment in this motion? I thought we're trying to get away from that.
My reason for using that language is that's the lexicon that I think that we're familiar with, the public is familiar with. If we put in the terminology was used, distribution of the stock, that may be more confusing, but if that's important to you, I'm certainly willing to consider an amendment.
Well, I think it's up to the group to decide, I think, how they feel about the use of that term or not.
Yeah, thanks very much for that question, Ted. I think my preference would be to make a change from apportionment to stock distribution, and then rather than taking a vote right now, we could draft up the proposal and then come back and consider it for a vote, if that would be okay.
That's fine with me. It would be great to hear thoughts from people on whether stock distribution means something different than apportionment as we currently understand it, which is deciding how much of the total ends up in each area. If you have a different idea of what stock distribution means, then we should probably be clear about that.
Sure. I do view them differently. I think one piece of it is the stock distribution in each one of the areas, and how much may be allocated or harvested in an area can be determined on the harvest rate. So I do see them differently.
I'm sorry, I missed that. That could be determined on the harvest rate?
Yeah.
Is that what we said? Okay.
Any other questions around the motion? No. All right. So I think if you're agreeable, then we would change it, or maybe you have more comments on changing apportionment to stock distribution.
I was just not quite clear on the process. You had said we'll draft it up and we'll come back to it another time. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right, for a vote. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'll write up what I've written and we can look at it with apportionment and with stock distribution and see what other word changes people might want to make. Is that a good place to leave it for now?
I think so, yes.
Great. Thank you.
All right. Dave, I don't think there's anything else on our agenda right now. So we're to reconvene at 1:30. Is there any way of, probably shouldn't move things around too much in the agenda. People are expecting to start at 1:30. Yep. So